Hello, the topic of this video is a political, ecological, and aesthetic analysis of the floods in Southeast Asia. So guys, this event here is not just a strange weather event. They are a breaking point in the way these countries have built their economies, also their cities, and also their relationship with nature. So of course, the immediate cause was the rare formation of tropical cyclone Senyar, which happened near the equator, and also with the destruction brought by cyclone Ditwah. But the scale of the disaster, around 1,200 people in 4 countries, and millions of people displaced, can only be understood by looking at how the regions uses land, reduces wealth, builds infrastructure, and also governs itself. So the goal of this video is to look at the disaster from several angles. We will study the political economy of deforestation, also rapid urbanization, which created the conditions for extreme vulnerability, and also we will examine the governance failures, such as corruption, weak institutions, and also austerity policies, all of this which have blocked an effective response. And by combining all this technical data with this critical theory, this video will make one point clear, that this disaster did not start with the rain. It was years in the making, built into the very foundations of how the region grows, builds, and governs its societies. And just to present myself, my name is Felipe Boni. I'm one of the founders of UGreen, a platform which has the goal to catalyze sustainability through construction. And actually, we have a course on sustainable home with a special discount. Take a look here in the description. But we also develop architectural projects and sustainability consultants all around the globe. So if you need a sustainable construction or a sustainable material, you can talk to us through the links in the description. And let's move on to the content. So the tropical cyclone Senyar formed into the Strait of Malacca, in this place where storms almost never form. And normally cyclones cannot develop within 5 degrees of the equator. And that's because of the Coriolis force, which gives storms their spin. So around here we have the equator line, and this is too close to the equator. So this Coriolis force, which gives the storms their spin, is too weak. But Senyar formed just north of the equator, showing this major shift in how warm and energized this region oceans have become. So the sea surface temperatures were extremely high. And this is because the ocean absorbs about 90% of the extra heat trapped by greenhouse gases. And with all that stored energy, Senyar gained strength and began acting like a giant moisture pump. So it pulled air from the Bay of Bengal and also the South China Sea here in this region, and then stalled over southern Thailand and northern Sumatra here. So this stalled behavior caused an event scientists call stagnant rainfall. So it's a relentless laying the same place for days. And the totals were unbelievable. More than 300 millimeters of water in many regions, and Hatyai in this region here recorded 630 millimeters of rain in just 3 days. So this amount is so extreme, it should only happen once every 300 years. And at the same time, Cyclone Ditwah moved along Sri Lanka's eastern coast and became a second disaster engine. So in this region here, Colombo, it dropped more than 300 millimeters of rain under 3 days as well. So it will flood the Central Highlands and also the Killarney River Basin. And these areas had already been soaked by the northeast monsoon. So the soil was fully saturated, meaning it could not absorb a single drop more. So the rain turned instantly into fast, destructive runoff. So together, Senyar, Ditwah, and also the typhoon Koto, which hit Vietnam and also the Philippines, it has created a huge connected band of storms. So it's like an atmospheric river going through this region here, stretching across South and Southeast Asia. So this produced a near continuous wall of extreme rainfall across the region. But it's important to avoid a simple explanation, because these storms produced the water, yes, but the disaster itself, the deaths, the displacement, and also the economic destruction, this came from the material conditions on the ground. So how the land was used, how cities were built, and how governments failed to prepare. This is what shaped the true impact of this event. So in Indonesia, especially on the island of Sumatra, the floods show the deep contradictions of an economy built on extraction. Because the main industries here are mining, palm oil plantations, and also pulpwood production. And these activities have reshaped the land so much that the environment can no longer absorb or manage extreme rainfall. So the hydrological cycle has been weakened, and the landscape has lost its government's natural defenses. And the heart of the disaster in North Sumatra was the Batang Toru ecosystem, which is here in this region. So this is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, and also the last home of the Tapanuli orangutan. So under this banner of development, this area has been turned into a zone where ecological damage is accepted in exchange for profit. So we have hydropower projects there. Here is another picture which we can see the disasters being caused. So it has become a sacrifice zone, a place where nature is traded for commodity exports. And environmental groups such as Walhi and Jatam, they have traced the worst impacts of the flash floods to specific companies operating in the region. So this damage is not random. It comes from identifiable concessions. So here we have the Mortable Gold Mine, and this company controls more than 130,000 hectares. And here we can see an image that 739 hectares of forests were cleared in the year before the floods. So by removing deep-rooted rainforests for open pit mining, destroys the soil's ability to hold water. And when Cyclone Senyar brought massive rainfall, the bare slopes collapsed into mudflows that buried entire villages. Also, we have the North Sumatra hydro energy. So building the Batang Toru hydropower plant required cleaning over 350 hectares of forests and moving huge amounts of soil. And these earthworks changed river flow patterns and increased sediment levels, making the river less able to carry flood water. Also, we have here TPL, the Toba pulpulestare. So TPL here has replaced natural forests with eucalyptus plantations in parts of Sipi Rock district. So here is the region. And while eucalyptus trees look like green cover, they do not function like a rainforest because their roots and understory are too simple, and it's going to cause more surface runoff. Also, we have here PT Soil Geothermal Indonesia. So geothermal projects cut roads into steep, this fragile terrain, and these roads act as channels that let water rush downhill at high speed, further destabilizing the watershed. So it's important to understand this. The ecological damage in Sumatra is not the result of hidden illegal activity. It is a legal process supported by the state. So the government uses the Forest Area Use Agreement system to rezone protected forests and open them for extraction. So Sumatra currently has at least 271 permits, and it's going to span more than 53,000 hectares, including 60 sea mining concessions. And this permissive structure become even stronger on the Omnibus Law on Job Creation, which made it easier for extractive industries to get permits by weakening environmental safeguards. And this reveals a core contradiction, because the Indonesian states depends on revenue from mining and plantations, yet this industry destroyed the nation's own land. And in effect, the states helps accelerate the consumption of its own territory. And the government's response to disaster shows how ideology works to protect the extractive economy. And after viral videos showing huge, these freshly cut logs being carried through floodwaters and piling up on beaches as well, many people suspected logging companies were responsible. But the Environment Ministry first denied this, claiming the wood was natural debris or already decayed. So this was a form of gaslighting meant to defend the system, because admitting the truth would mean admitting that industrial operations helped cause a disaster. And later, the government announced that it would summon 8 companies and also review the mining practices, meant to calm public anger without changing the economic model that created the destruction in the first place. And the logs themselves are the clearest material proof, because their nature turned it into a commodity, now washed back into the villages of people who bear the cost of extraction. And in southern Thailand, the disaster revealed a deep problem in how cities are built and how the government responds to emergencies. So the flooding of Hat Yai, southern Thailand's main commercial center, it showed what happens when urban growth is driven by land speculation instead of by the real needs of water, drainage, and also geography. And it also exposed how a highly centralized political system slows down urgent action, because Hat Thai sees a natural bowl-shaped depression surrounded by mountains. And in the past, this basin worked like a giant sponge, soaking up monsoon rain and releasing it slowly. But decades of rapid development have covered the sponge with concrete and also asphalt. And this flood has created a total breakdown of the city's gray infrastructure. So the pumps, the drains, the canals, which were designed to handle storms that statistically happen once every 100 years. But the 630 millimeters rainfall event was far beyond what the system could handle, because in its natural form, Hat Yai's basin would have absorbed around 80% of rainfall. But today, with almost everything paved over, about 95% of rain becomes becomes instant runoff. So this city turned into a closed bathtub, water pouring in and nowhere for it to escape. And roads and railways built to support economic growth did the opposite during the storm, because they raised embankments worked like accidental dams, trapping water inside neighborhoods and blocking it from flowing naturally towards Songkhla Lake. So they were trapping water inside neighborhoods such as Katrina and New Orleans, and then blocking it from flowing naturally towards Songkhla Lake. And Thailand talks publicly about adopting sponge city ideas. So to help the city combat the effects of climate change, Thailand's Cape architect Kochakorn Vorakhom has created a public park in Bangkok designed to withstand the frequent flooding. So here we can see some pictures of that. So a sponge city, it protects wetlands, uses permeable surfaces, and integrates green infrastructure to absorb water. But these ideas never made it to secondary cities like Hat Yai. So what we saw here instead were wetlands filled to build housing developments and also shopping centers, and also natural floodplains that were built over, and parks and green areas were sacrificed for real estate profit. So they created the opposite of a sponge city. It created a rigid city that could only fail under extreme rainfall. So the disaster revealed the gap between cutting-edge ideas that are discussed in the capital and the harsh reality of how provincial cities are actually built. And the political system made the disaster worse. Thailand's emergency management is heavily centralized, which means local authorities often cannot act quickly. So local leaders in Hat Yai waited for approval from Bangkok before ordering mass evacuations. And of course, this hesitation cost valuable hours and left thousands stuck in their homes as flood waters rose. And also weather agencies had the technology to forecast the storms, but the alerts were vague. And instead of clear evacuations like evacuate zone A now, residents received the generic warnings like heavy rain expected. So the science worked, but communication did not. And of course, the flooding has already become a major political issue. So Prime Minister here, Anutin Charnvirakul, he faced harsh criticism for reacting too slowly. So his late apology and this image of him cooking for victims, which many saw as a PR move, damaged his credibility ahead of the 2026 elections. And of course, the opposition quickly used the disaster to attack the government, calling it a proof that the administration cannot manage the national crisis. So in this sense, the flood waters washed away not only streets, not only homes, but also part of the ruling coalition's political legitimacy. And now let's go to Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka's experience during the floods was shaped in a unique way by its ongoing sovereign debt crisis. So disaster shows what happened under austerity ecology, a situation where international leaders, especially the IMF, forcing budget cuts that weaken the state's ability to maintain the basic infrastructure people depend on to survive. So the Kelani River Flood Protection System, which defends the capital city of Colombo, which is located here on the west side, it is a complex network that needs constant care. So canals must be dredged, pumps must be serviced, and embankments must be reinforced. But after the 2022 economic collapse and the IMF bailout program, Sri Lanka was required to slash public spending to meet strict financial targets. So the Department of Irrigation and the Colombo Municipal Council lost much of their operating budget. So canals filled with silt and garbage, pumps went without repairs or spare parts, and some stations even lacked fuel. So by the time Cyclone Ditwah arrived, the city's defenses were already weakened, not by weather, but by fiscal policy. So Colombo's drainage system depends on electric pumps, but the national power grid is unstable because of the ongoing economic crisis. And during the storm, electricity could not be guaranteed, which caused low-lying neighborhoods to flood rapidly. So the floods have pushed Sri Lanka deeper into a cycle where debt makes disaster worse, and disaster makes then debt worse. So we have more than 510,000 hectares of rice fields destroyed. So it caused losses of 31 billion Sri Lanka rupees, which is like $100 million. So this threatens food security. And because domestic production collapsed, Sri Lanka will now have to import rice, using foreign currency reserves that are already scarce and needed for debt payments. So building will cost millions of rupees. But under IMF rules and the Fiscal Management Responsibility Act, which limits the national deficit to 6.7% of GDP, the government has also no space to spend on recovery. So this means Sri Lanka may need to borrow even more money. So the result is debt-prevented resilience, which caused more damage, which now requires more debt to fix. And Colombo land-use politics also shaped the disaster, because the wetlands around the city once acted as natural flood buffers. But over the past decades, these wetlands have been filled for development, often and luxury housing, also commercial projects, or large state-led construction. So this form of land grabbing has reduced the city's water retention capacity by about 40%. And of course, the people who suffered the most were the urban poor, many of whom live in informal settlements along canal banks, and these communities sit on edge of disappearing wetlands, and they were hit hardest when flood water is spread across areas that nature once protected. And here in Malaysia, the floods in Kelantan here, also Terengganu here, and Perlis here, it revealed a deep problem inside the country's flood mitigation system, because the disaster was not only about engineering failures, it was also about corruption, weak oversight as well, and a political culture that treats disaster budgets as opportunities for profit. And the Auditor General's report for 2025 uncovered massive irregularities in government spending, with billions flagged across different ministries. And not all of this involved flood projects, but it shows a pattern of financial leakage that directly harms disaster preparedness. And just to mention, this value here is around $12 billion. So how the corruption works here? Because money meant for flood defenses, such as bonds, river walls, and dredging, it gets passed through layers of subcontractors and also politically connected middlemen. So by the time the funds reach the ground, there is often little left to build real infrastructure. So this leads to ghost projects. Projects that appear in budgets, they get paid for, but they never get built, or are built so poorly that they fail at the first sign of stress. So the Sungai Golok development project here, it was supposed to protect the region, but delays, design flaws, and also poor construction, it left the bunds unfinished or weak. And when the river rose, the structures gave way, flooding Rantau Panjang and also Pasir Mas. So residents living next to these half-done projects, they pay the price for bureaucratic incompetence and also corruption. And the flooding of the Golok River, which separates Malaysia from Thailand, Thailand is here, Malaysia here, it sparkled a geopolitical argument about whether to build a border wall. And Kelantan's police chief, which his name is Datuk Mamat, he pushed for a security wall, so it will both fight smuggling and also act as a flood barrier. But this idea clashes with basic hydrology, because a tall wall on the Malaysian side will simply push the poor water onto Thailand's side, especially into Narathiwat, making their flooding worse. So Thailand agreed to discuss the idea, but stressed the need for careful coordination. So this situation shows a classic beggar-thy-neighbor approach to flood control, where one country tries to protect itself by shifting the risk to someone else, instead of solving the problem together. So these floods show the failure of the long-standing idea that we can engineer our way out of natural disasters, because this attempt to control monsoon waters with dams, canals, and also walls has hit its limit. And the disaster has something in common. They show it that great infrastructure, so concrete drains, pumps, seawalls, they cannot handle the scale of climate change. So these systems are rigid, they are expensive, and they are easy to overwhelm. So in Hatia and Colombo, everything depended on pumps, which were powered by the electrical grid. And when the grid failed, the entire drainage system collapsed with it. So there are better options, and these are nature-based solutions. So we can, for example, restore wetlands, we can protect forests, and we can use permeable materials in cities, which help repair the water cycle and reduce flood risks. So for example, in Indonesia, restoring peatlands could save billions by preventing fires and floods. Also in Sri Lanka, the wetlands around Colombo provide food protection worth millions of dollars each year. But these solutions are rarely scaled up because they clash with the logic of land speculation. So a wetland that remains a wetland cannot be turned into a luxury development. So even though nature-based solutions is cheaper, safer, and more sustainable, political and economic pressures prevent it from being adopted widely. So these floods were a message from the biosphere. The economy can no longer treat nature as a free resource or a bottomless dumping ground. Unfortunately, water will take back its space. So now society must adjust, and also ecologically, to this new and shifting reality. So let me know what you think in the comments. Do you live in one of these regions? Do you know someone who lives on these regions? Share your opinions in the comments, and let's spread this important conversation. Also press share and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the newer videos. Hope you enjoyed this journey here with me, and see you in the next video. Have a great week.